Welcome to the Growth Whispers podcast, where everything we talk about is about building enduring great companies, because that's something that myself, Kevin Lawrence, and my partner here, Brad Giles, we're passionate about. We get a kick out of. Brad, how you doing today?
I'm doing excellent, thank you. Very good in this type of the world. We are fully back into the swing of the new year, and yeah, things are going really well. How are you doing, Kevin?
Things are going great here too. And I'm up in the Okanagan today, and it's a beautiful sunny day, cold as heck, but it's all good. So what are we on for today, Brad? What are we gonna dig into and have some interesting conversation about?
Today we're talking about the brilliant jerk. But before, what an interesting subject, a meaty one. We've all served alongside brilliant jerks. But before that, let's ask the question about the phrase of the day. We always like to say phrase of the day, or we advocate it when you run meetings as well. Just a simple way to start and perhaps break the ice. So I'll start off on that, Kevin. And I do that because as I look at your face, I'm thinking, he's still thinking about one. So mine is reset. And reset, because every time we run a quarterly or an annual meeting, I have a slide and it's reset, because we are resetting. It doesn't matter what's happened. It doesn't matter the successes or the failures. Everything stops and gets reset so that we can build our next business plan for the next 90 days. Reset. Okay. So Kevin, what might be your word or phrase of the day?
Yeah, well, mine is resilience, interestingly, because I'm feeling damn good. I bounced back from what I think was COVID that I got knocked down a bit by. I feel amazing. But I also did a keynote this morning for a large organization, a global organization, on resilience. And so it's fresh on my mind. I've written lots about it and we talk lots about it. But it's how important resilience is. And resilience is your ability to bounce back from whatever life or work throws at you. So reset and resilience. And that those two words tie nicely together. We're doing a little resilience reset today, Brad. All right, good. Well, let's try and reset some brilliant jerks, because they need it.
They do need it. They do.
And I want to make a disclaimer. I think there's a number of times in my life that I might have been that jerk. Well, maybe not the brilliant part, but I definitely could have been the jerk part. You know, as an aggressive personality, I can think of a number of times when people probably called me a jerk and I probably earned it. Actually, no, I definitely earned it. And there's no probablys in that. So like, we all have moments where our behavior is not great. Whether a button gets pushed or we get triggered or we're in a bad place, it doesn't matter. We all have it, but that's not what we're talking about. People have, little things that go a bit sideways. We are talking about the terminal cases. The people who are generally, consistently, always just really frustrating to be around, and it doesn't seem to change.
We all have good days and we all have bad days. It's part of the human condition. Maybe we didn't get enough sleep. Maybe something is affecting us. Maybe we're worried, or we've got our other pressures. So everyone has good and bad days. But where are you at your average? That's kind of what we're saying here. So you may have been a brilliant jerk, or I might have at some point, or even just a jerk. But where do you reset to the average in terms of your being able to deal with other people? That's what we're saying, because brilliant jerks, when they reset to the average is a brilliant jerk. It's not, the average is they're a jerk. They don't play well with others. They upset their team members. They don't align with our core values in the organization. So
consistently is the key.
Yeah. So you get a bit of a leave pass, as it were, for having a bad day. Everybody does. And that's okay. But where's your average? That's what we're really saying today.
It is your trend line. So what makes someone a brilliant jerk? Our first kind of point we want to dig into, and really, this is someone they're normally really good at their job. Like, they are very effective, but they've got this bad attitude and it causes just a lot of friction around them. And usually the ones that keep their jobs for a while, the friction's internal. Whatever they do externally seems to be good. And in the book I wrote, Your Oxygen Mask First, we call them a toxic A player, which means a performance on getting the results in their role, but toxic because they don't fit the culture and they're generally violating a few key core values.
And upsetting the people around them on a regular basis. So if you're a leader and you're having regular chats about one particular individual, maybe there's a bit of a chance around that. So I remember there's one CEO who will go unnamed. And I would have to say for 4, maybe even 5 years, every time we would be talking about this particular individual. And he would always say the same thing. If Dave leaves, then we are going to lose some of our most important customers. And I was like, but what is it costing us? We've got to...
If he stays. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a cost if he leaves and there's a cost if he stays. Now, yes.
And we tried to reconcile that, but it was a really, really tough conversation. And of course, as is always the case, Dave ended up going in a horribly messy situation. And afterwards, it was partially, the doing of the leader, and it was partially not, but because the pressure began to build and the frustration.
Yep.
And so as we got toward the end, and then we passed the end, the CEO was saying, I wish I'd done it years ago, as is always the case.
Always say that, yes. And normally you don't lose the customers you think you're going to lose. Right?
Yeah.
Now, if they own key relationships and they're in a revenue generation, there can be an impact. But generally, we build it to be bigger in our head. I'm not saying there aren't cases. There are cases where we've had to deal with this and have a plan over a year or 2 years before, because we didn't want to take the chance of overly disrupting, the revenue line of the company.
This guy, we were at a 2-day annual meeting and we went out for dinner, and this guy dominated the conversation for like an hour or 2 without anyone getting another word in edgeways, to the point where people pretended they needed to go to the bathroom so they could just go outside and try to form their own conversations. It was typical brilliant jerk behavior.
So I had a company I was working with down in the US. Been working with them a couple of years. We had a tight executive team, massive momentum, great growth. Everything was great. And we had a new CFO. And this is before I was forcing my clients to top grade all the key hires. I come in the room. He'd been in the company 42 days. This is a quarterly. We're at the coffee break and I go to the CEO. So do we want to fire him at lunch or do we wait till tomorrow? Without even talking to the CEO. I was listening to the conversation on the break. I saw him in action and I went, this is atrocious. And it had almost broke down all the health and harmony of the exec team in 42 days. Now we waited, this is Thursday. We didn't fire him that lunch. We didn't fire him on Friday, but we did Monday morning. We waited till after the weekend, which is because it was just a wrong hire. And the damage these people can do. I have another one, similar scenario. And I had a bit of a talk. I gave the CEO a bit of a talking to. He hired this guy. This is 10 years ago. He hired him over the phone without ever meeting him. And it was a sales guy. And we weren't using Zoom back then. We're in a very conservative company. He's telling locker room jokes that are insanely inappropriate in front of the mixed crowd at the coffee break. And I said to the CEO, you need to fire him and you should do it at lunchtime. We need to get this guy out of here. We did it at the end of the day. We let the meeting run out. We didn't want to disrupt the meeting. We fired him at 5 o'clock. Because those are extreme. But another one I've seen some examples and kind of our point 2 we're talking is one of my clients had one who was their best truck driver. And I've shared this story in the past. They were in Vancouver. They had their own fleet of trucks that they had to get across the mountain pass to another place called Calgary. And these are extreme mountain passes. Even they made this show about this highway in the winter called the Highway Through Hell. The highway is called the Coquihalla. It's one of the ones that got washed out during the big storm we had in Western Canada in November of 2021. It did not matter what the weather was. He would always get through on time. Most reliable truck driver, maintained his truck perfectly, cleanest truck. Just a little problem. They would get 1 or 2 complaints every week from people on the road because of his aggressive driving and how he would cut people off and be an ass on the road. Now, because their company name was on the trailers and the trucks.
Yeah.
So, it was hard because he was so damn good. And, I'm sure you've got other examples too, Brad, but they're really good at their job. They're just a liability and like a ticking time bomb.
The important part about what you said there in the context of the word jerk is that it's not just doesn't play well with others inside the firm, because he was not playing well with others on the public roads. And so it's in general doesn't play well with others. So let's talk about the definition, the brilliant jerk. Now, you and I might interchange that with a toxic A player. And that comes from the book, Top Grading as well. The definition of A player, someone who's in the top 10% of available candidates at the pay rate that you provide. So this is someone who's producing the numbers. They're pretty consistent at hitting the numbers for their role, but they don't live the core values. No one wants to sit next to them. No one wants to hang out with them or get into some kind of lunchtime banter with them because they're a jerk. And they're a mismatch for your culture. They might not be a bad human being. They're just in the wrong darn place. Like the guy that we did fire at the end of the day, the sales guy who got hired on the phone, he would have been perfect at some place where women never went and guys just talked about crazy stuff all day. They probably the old cheesy used car lot, maybe. Yep.
Or there's places where he actually probably, because he was a personable guy, he just was crude in a conservative environment. So there are environments that aren't conservative that he could have been great in.
But he couldn't, my reading of the situation, he couldn't recognize that was inappropriate. He didn't have the EQ to recognize this is not a locker room. This is a mixed environment where in a professional setting where it's not really appropriate.
Exactly.
And so the big thing about toxic A's or brilliant jerks is that you've got to take action, no matter what it is. It may be easy for us to say, get them out, fire them, but that's one option. But you can't just, if they're toxic, you can't just let them sit and fester because the cost to the team is simply too high. So,
but why do people let that sit and fester?
Because they're worried about the productivity loss. Because brilliant jerks, they're brilliant, they're high productivity, okay, but they're low on the behavioral or the cultural side. And so they're fearful that we won't, like the example I provided, we won't be able to replace those customers or those sales or whatever. We'll get someone in.
It's fear and scarcity.
Yes.
That they're fearful and the scarcity of, if we do, something bad is going to happen. That's the root of it. And it's unfounded. You might take your time and you might be smart about it, but you could always work your way around. We had one in another company that unfortunately didn't work out recently. And there was a lot of concern about the additional workload and strain on the team. If you only had 3 people, maybe.
Yeah.
But you got 20, 30, 50, 100, 500 people, the system handles it. And they're often relieved because the stress and the tension is out of the environment.
So you've got to take action. Inaction is perhaps where your gut will take you, motivated by fear, as you said. But you've got to take some kind of action on this. And for many people, they'll be like, the fear says, I don't want to fire them. it's your read on the situation. If that's the case, then try to move into some kind of coaching situation with them to help them to understand the problems. I mean, we genuinely want to give everyone a fair chance at helping themselves to become better, to be able to align. It won't always happen, but if you want to, it's appropriate to give them a good chance.
I agree. And you always owe it to it, because they may not have been made aware about it. They might have been like that their whole life. Their manager might not be doing it if they don't report to you. You might not be giving the feedback. So there is truth. The other thing that's important, not taking action endorses the behavior.
Oh yeah.
So, your culture isn't the words on the wall and what you said it is. Your culture is your hiring and your promotion decisions. When you promote these brilliant jerks, what you're saying is core values don't mean anything. If you're highly productive, it's okay to be a jerk. No matter what we say, you're endorsing it. If you allow them to stay in their positions, you're endorsing it, which undermines your culture and your value that you're showing towards other people.
And people look at you as the leader and think that you just don't care, right? And that's the
correct
other real problem, because they would think, I totally align with these values of this company or the behavioral expectations. And then they would look at the toxic A, the brilliant jerk, and they would say, this person is not acting in the way in which everybody talks about the culture here. And then they look at the leader and they say, well, obviously this person doesn't really care about these values.
Correct.
Or these behaviors.
Yeah, they're like, well, why would I work so hard to be effective where this person can get away with all this? So it's tough. So you got to address it, and there's lots of different things you can do. But the biggest thing is to make sure they get the straight goods, and we often get brought in to help turn these people around. Good leaders want to give them a chance and make sure they haven't missed it and missed something. And so normally where we start is the manager making sure they're actually giving them the real tough feedback. That's, sometimes, we'll do in-depth. We do a very, very thorough, deep, in-depth 360 where you're interviewing people, getting lots of details of what it is, measuring them on a few different ratings of leadership, debriefing it with them and their manager, coming up with action plans of how they're going to get better at the behavior. That can help. Yeah. That can get through them. Exit interviews when people leave, because normally people that work with or for these people, there will be carnage. People, it'll cause carnage. So even some of that, or client feedback, whatever data you can put in front of them to try and give them a wake-up call. Like, hey, this isn't working. Things need to change, and here's why. And this is where HR has an amazing, important role in companies, is to make sure that it is crystal clear, the feedback they've been given, because a lot of managers are not very good at laying out the truth in a way where it's like, if this doesn't change, you're going to lose your job.
Yeah. And they may, through fear or whatever, be reluctant, especially because of the performance. They're achieving the numbers.
You got it.
They believe they're helping the manager to achieve their numbers. Maybe they're even one of the highest performers on the team. And so the manager is thinking, if that person goes and that's a hit to the overall productivity or performance of the team, then that's going to make my job so much harder. And so they kind of tend to turn a bit of a blind eye toward the behavior, but not really appreciating the overall negative cost that it's bringing. Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yep. But after you've had those conversations, I mean, the example I provided, we gave that guy almost a year's worth of coaching, one-on-one coaching with a coach to dig into it. Sometimes it just won't work. Sometimes they are such a brilliant jerk of excellent proportions that they're not going to be able to change who they are. They've got hardwired emotional issues that you will not be able to disentangle. And if that's the case, you need to take action. You cannot let this person continue to be toxic inside the team.
Yeah, and that's the hard part. You just need to make sure you've given them chances. Make sure that they have clear written goals. Maybe it's a performance improvement plan. Maybe you get them a coach. Maybe you send them on a training or a personal growth program. Often people want to make sure they've given them the chances and given them all the chances to continue to earn their role in the company. And then if it doesn't, it's time to move on. It's painful, and treat them as fairly as you can, be respectful as you can, and let's move on.
Pick a date.
And knowing what's that? Yeah, and pick a date. That's what we will do. We get people to pick a date. It's gonna be if there isn't notable improvement, and we know we followed the processes the best we can, then pick a date. Now the key is, once that's done, you also got to make sure, generally when these people leave, there's a little bit of happiness in the company. And the key thing is we also want to maintain a respectful culture and don't let people celebrate too much. Like, try and keep it really pro. And at the same time, make sure you're listening to all of them saying, we should have dealt with this sooner, right? That's feedback for you, the decision maker, that this probably should have been dealt with a long time ago.
Because what's implicit in that statement is, and they may not have the courage to ask this of their leader, why didn't you deal with this sooner? Because that's the evidence that they're questioning your activity and your action.
Correct. And then the final step is, well, how do we prevent all of this in the first place? Which will be our next podcast when we talk about the top grading methodology that is designed to make sure you only put the right people into new roles, whether they're external hires or internal promotions, having a very thorough process to minimize these mistakes that are not good for the person, and they're not good for us. Nobody, actually, it's not good for the team either. Nobody's winning with these people being in the roles they should be in.
And that's our episode 100, a very interesting one to look forward to, a bit of a milestone for us. But how do you consistently hire people who live your values and are productive in their role at an acceptable level? That's what we're going to be talking about next week on the Growth Whisperers. Okay, so thanks for listening. A good chat about the brilliant jerk. Unfortunately, a part of life for many leaders and teams. So I guess in summary, we have covered off what is a brilliant jerk. They're productive in the role or highly productive. They're low on the values and behaviors. We've provided a few examples there, and also being able to explain that you must take action. No matter what it is, you must kind of take action. Any other further comments on all of that, Kevin, to close us out?
No, it's great. It's just they're hard situations to deal with. And our job is just to make sure that we really give them the best chance they can of being successful with our company, or freeing them up to go get a job in a company that they suit better.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so thank you for listening. This has been the Growth Whisperers podcast. My name is Brad Giles, and you can find me at evolutionpartners.com.au, and you can find Kevin at lawrenceandco.com. And obviously, we both produce newsletters full of actionable, interesting insights every week. You can also subscribe to those for more. Thanks for listening. We hope you have a great week, and look forward to chatting to you again next week on the Growth Whisperers.
Have a great one.